Okay. We do have a quorum. And so let me share my screen and put up the agenda so we can move into the first item, which is approving the agenda. And I just want to say hello and welcome to everyone, council members and others who have joined us today, especially for those who are not council members who have joined us. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this process. Your input is very valuable. And I hope you'll speak up at times that public commentary is invited for one agenda item that we have today. I see Tony has joined. Hello, Tony. Okay.
Everyone, really sorry about being late. Logged into the wrong week.
Well, sorry for that, but no worries. We're just getting started. Okay, this should be our agenda for today. Now, when this agenda is open, I cannot see anybody. So if anyone has any issues with on the technology side or anything else, please just speak up and let me know. Otherwise, let's move to our first agenda item, which is approving today's agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Move approval of the agenda.
Thank you. Second? I think I heard a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Today's agenda is approved. So next I will share the minutes so we could move for their approval as well. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, the minutes should now be up. I did provide copies of those minutes in advance and they are on the website. Hopefully you are viewing them now. Can I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our last meeting on May 6, 2021?
Move we approve the minutes of the May 6th PRAC meeting.
Second.
Okay, those minutes are approved and made part of the record. Thank you. Okay. All right. So our next agenda item is election of a chairperson and vice chairperson for the Public Records Advisory Council. Now, these positions were created upon passage of SB 500 and went into effect immediately. And so therefore, the PRAC is now obligated to select individuals for those two positions. The terms for those positions are spelled out in the bill, and they can be renewed continuously for whomever is elected into those positions now. What I'd like to do is have any member who's interested nominate either themselves or somebody else on the council as chair or vice chair, upon which we could discuss the process for taking the votes. But before we do that, I'd like to put it to this council how exactly we should go about this. Should we have individuals just offer up their or other council members' names, and then the top vote getter would be chair and the second most highest vote getter would be vice chair, or would you prefer that people were nominated separately for chair and vice chair? So I'd like to take discussion on that. And I think Mark's finger went up first, so go ahead, Mark.
Todd, thank you very much. My question actually has to do with the terms of the existing members and how soon, if any, of us are terming out of our present position, if that makes any sense.
It does.
I think that it's important for us to have an understanding. That's not me, by the way. It sounds like my daughter 10 years ago, but it's not me. I do not play the violin.
I have two kids who play cello, but it's not either of them.
Sorry, it's my husband teaching cello lessons. I will try to remember to mute.
Thanks, Emily.
Sorry, I had the wrong wood string instrument there, Emily. The reason I asked, Todd, is simply I don't know if anybody would term out, say, within the next year, and I don't know if we as council necessarily want to consider somebody for the chair, vice chair, or secretary if they're going to be a short termer. That's really the only question I had. Thank you.
Mark, that is an absolutely fair question, and I do not have a complete answer for you. Appointment of members to the council as well as their reappointment when their terms are completed is a process that's wholly in control of the governor and then subject to Senate confirmation. There's been some question over everyone's term on the PRAC as to when your terms expire, and there has been, I believe, at least some confusion as to when those terms actually end, given the previous bill that made the PRAC permanent that passed in the 2019 session, I believe. So that being said, anyone who is appointed is eligible to be reappointed to the PRAC. And thus, if they were interested in staying on and the governor reappointed them, then they could continue in whatever position they held at that time. I do believe you all might be coming up for renewal. I also believe that some of you may have chosen not to stay on as well, and presumably whomever isn't intending on staying on won't be running for a position, but of course that's up to each individual to decide for themselves. So Mark, honestly, I think we should proceed with those who wish to be considered because we're all, most members are subject to not being, I guess, continuing on the PRAC, even if they wish to do so, if the governor chose not to reappoint them anyway, so we cannot guarantee what's going to happen down the road. But if you're a current member, you'd like to be renewed, if the governor chose to do so and had no reason to believe you were leaving, I'd say go ahead and put your name in if you're interested, and then I suppose we could worry about the repercussions later should that change, if that makes sense to everybody.
Todd, could I make just one request? And I'm perfectly happy with going along with your recommended pathway forward. In the meantime, though, it would be helpful, I think, if we could get some clarity on that. I don't know when my term ends. I just don't off the top of my head. It'd be nice to know, get official ideas to when that happens, because for some of us who have served since its inception, there may be need to think about transitioning and so forth. So I would just make that one request. Thank you.
I'm happy to reach out to the governor's office to see if they will tell us. I saw Emily wishes to speak and maybe Scott, but before you do that, I'm very bad at remembering to check the chat. So I would like to do that periodically. And I'm going to do that now just to make sure I haven't missed anybody's comments. So please bear with me. Okay, we're good.
My question is whether you could go over the duties of the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary before we talk about who would serve.
Absolutely, Emily. Good question. And as with most things related to our work, those positions are undefined. Presently, the chair of the PRAC, the public records advocate, is the chair, and I have envisioned that to mean that you are the administrative director of the council. You set the agenda, you set the meetings, of course, in consultation with your council colleagues, and the public records advocate is the custodian of the record, so that probably wouldn't change even if I were no longer the chair or vice chair. And I assume the vice chair might be a more flexible position and one that could be developed in conjunction with the chair, but would essentially assist with meetings, serve in place of the chair when the chair is absent, and things of that nature. I'd love to hear if anyone has any other ideas about those positions, but these are definitely things we would have to flesh out over time. Oh, so anyone care to comment on that? Because if not, I'll go to Scott next.
I mean, I'm also wondering about, as we think about these, what is the time commitment for these roles, and what would your role as the advocate be in working with conjunction? Do you see this as being, you could not serve any of these positions, that you could serve in some but not others? Yeah, and the responsibilities and the time commitment would be interesting to really know.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, as the advocate, I think I can serve in this role. It's certainly, there are pros and cons to doing so from my own personal view. I mean, I'm the only person that gets paid to think about this stuff full time, and it's a clear outgrowth of my other work as the advocate. So I'm a likely candidate to do this work. At the same time, the PRAC is now responsible for appointing and terminating the advocate, and it could be, that's definitely one reservation I had about establishing that system from the outset, because obviously, as the chair, you may have to do things that the council doesn't always like, and could that, if just speaking hypothetically, could that then affect reappointment or other working relationships? But I think that's just the reality of this situation. I have no concerns about continuing in this role, and I do intend to put my own name in as a candidate because I think it makes sense for the person in this role to be the chair, but it certainly doesn't have to be. And if I am not chair or vice chair after this election, then I will just be another member of the council that will continue to work with everyone and assist in any way I can. Okay. If there's no response on that issue,
people have their hands. People have their hands up.
Yeah, I want to move on to everyone else, whether to talk about this or whatever point they wanted to make. So go ahead, Scott.
So I did inquire the governor's office of my term. I believe it ends in December. I think I'm looking for a practitioner within the league to fill the city spot per my conversation with the governor's office. However, I think, given the nature that I think several of the terms are either up in December or in the next quarter, if I think we vote in who wants the job. If the governor chooses not to appoint, or there's some issue with confirmation, then there's a process to fill those vacancies with who does get those spots. So if people are going to put in and they intend to continue on, let's just do that. And if it doesn't work out, there's a mechanism.
Yes. Steve and then Tony.
Yeah, I was thinking, the reason why we separated chair from advocate was because of the issue, because the PRAC was becoming the appointing body when the legislation was written, as I recall. And so I can see a lot of sense to you're continuing as chair, as long as the only question is not just you, but kind of the abstract advocate person in the future, is there a mechanism by which the council could convene, in dire need to remove the advocate or to simply deliberate on the upcoming expiration of the advocate's term? Does the vice chair have the ability to call a meeting of the PRAC, or what would our avenue be for that, to avoid the conflict of interest?
Yeah, that's a good point, Steve. And we can develop some sort of mechanism, either that, if a majority of the members of the PRAC contact the chair, whomever that is, about advocates' removal or reappointment, or alternatively, it just becomes the sole duty of the vice chair to address those issues. Either one could protect the process. But yeah, these are the kinds of things we're going to have to figure out for sure.
Another thing to figure out is agenda setting, I guess, in general. I think, and so far, Todd, if anybody wants anything on the agenda, and I think this was true in the last go around as well, but just got on the agenda. But yeah, I guess that, Steve, would be an extreme situation, right, where the council wanted to discuss the removal of the advocate and the advocate didn't want to put it on the agenda and the advocate was the chair, right? So there would be maybe some mechanism of just how does anything get on the agenda that would be more formalized than the discretion of the chair.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Tony?
Yeah, just to kind of go along those lines, would it be worth, I think I'm one of the people that's on the first wave of term expirations. So what would it be worth, maybe this period between now and the next round of terms, kind of developing, sorry if this is a dumb term, but like a bylaw for operating groups, not the minutia of state law, but, just like this is what the chair is going to do and what the vice chair and the committee heads, and kind of have that all set together by the time I think the terms start in January. It would seem, we've waited this long for the first cohort of members to just seems kind of appropriate to me to just kind of fully vet the preparation, and then the next cohort, whoever that is, if it's all of us, it'd be great. But could then take on as carrying forward those elections and policy. I don't want to call them, whatever the bylaw regulations come out. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, this body has operated really well without written bylaws for its entire history and always made it a successful collegial process, but having something in writing, at least around these issues of concern, is definitely a good idea. The second half of our meeting next Thursday is non-legislative goals and then forming committees to effectuate all legislative and non-legislative goals. So why don't we include defining the chair and vice chair positions in, as one of our non-legislative goals, and then either folding it into another committee we create or making a committee of its own to effectuate that outcome. And just to Emily's point or question about time commitment, it's in some sense up to the chair and vice chair, like to what extent, when it's close to meeting time, of course, this occupies more of my time than we're in an intervening period, because especially since I'm on my own, I'm focused on the day-to-day work of running the office and doing the other advocates' core duties. But a chair and a vice chair could kind of make the position their own and go deeper if they want beyond the mere administrative process and agenda setting, realistically. And, the chair doesn't have to head every subcommittee for sure. I think we should be looking for balance. That's part of the reason we'll get to a discussion of the secretary position, because frankly, it's one more duty that I don't have the bandwidth to take on. And I'm asking the PRAC to be a part of the process. Oh, Les, sorry. I believe you wanted to say something.
That's okay. I can stay quiet for a little longer. I guess I'll put up a minority point of view here that I'm not sure it is a good idea to have the advocate also serve as the council chairperson. That was the original structure, right, of the council, and the reform legislation that we all worked so hard for made a very deliberate distinction to separate those responsibilities for good reason, I think. And it's not that I don't think, Todd, that you could execute on that duty. I just believe that the long fight we've had to establish the independence of this council, I think, calls for a chair and vice chair separate from the paid advocate position. I'd be interested to hear maybe from Scott and Mark. I'm trying to think of any other governing body where the principal staff person also is the chair of the oversight council. But I would be reluctant to support sort of going back to what we originally started with, and think that the independence of the leadership positions are important for the public facing view of the council.
Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
I believe Emily had her hand up first.
Okay, Emily, please.
So I think just a confusion between the mechanical hand and the actual hand. Thanks.
Yeah.
Scott.
So I'm happy to respond to Les's question. It is to my knowledge, a unique governance structure. I think there are some reasons why, Todd, you may not want to be the chair. I mean, I think I will say, ask somewhat rhetorically, do you want to preside over the conversation where we review your performance? I mean, that strikes me as somewhat awkward and potentially a violation of other ethics statutes. You're presiding over the hire and fire board, so that creates certain problems that I think are best avoided. I think you may want to consult with your DOJ attorney on some of that, but as a board member, that strikes me as somewhat complicated. So if you want to put your name in for it and make your case, by all means. But I think there are some considerations that technical and and practical that are challenges.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Scott. I think there are strong arguments in both directions, and I appreciate everyone sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? Before we move to a motion about electing, well, we still need to figure out the process as well. In terms of those who are interested, do we just go for the top two vote getters for chair and vice chair, or do we elect people separately? And I honestly don't have a strong opinion either way. So maybe we need to put that to a vote first. Molly?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet many of you that I haven't met before. And I'm here as the Secretary of State's designee to the PRAC. I think, first of all, with the caveat that I have no interest in any of these positions, and I think I would actually be in trouble with my boss if I was to take one. I think there would be a benefit in, and I don't want to belabor it either, having two different votes, because it feels like we've got different constituencies and viewpoints here, and so having some balance in the chair and the vice chair, and not having, both of our chair and vice chair be government people, say, might, that's what feels right to me, is just to try to have some balance in the views that are represented. But if at the end of the day there's only two people here that are willing to do it, then I'm not going to put up a fight.
Thank you.
Todd, this is Michael Crone on the
Go ahead,
phone.
Michael.
And I don't know that we need to vote on it, but I actually agree with what Molly just said. It seems to me the easiest way to handle it is like if someone wants to nominate someone for a position, including themselves, they just nominate themselves for that position, or you can just take nominees, and then if people who are disappointed not to get one position want the other one, they can either renominate themselves or renominate the person if they feel like it.
That's fair, and I appreciate Molly's acknowledgement that a balance would be helpful. I don't think it's guaranteed by doing two votes, but it very well could help us along, and balance is favorable. So that having two votes works for me. Does anyone have any strong disagreements and think we should just go for the two top vote getters? Steve, is your hand up, or is it just still up? Sorry.
Not directly related to that question, but I was curious whether, Scott, whether your concern about, and you too, Les, I guess the concern about the advocate in the chair position also would pertain to vice chair.
Yeah, I still this is Les. I still think that the leadership ought to come from the appointed members of the council, separate from the advocate in both positions.
I would still have a concern. I would say it's less of a concern for the vice chair. I think the potential conflicts and the potential jeopardy that the chair might be in could be alleviated through scheduling changes if the chair was unavailable. But still a concern.
What about co-chairs?
That's not what our statute says. The statute says chair and vice chair. I guess it doesn't preclude having two people in the chair position, but I think that will become unwieldy and could be subject to challenge over the definition. And we're not that many people anyway. Okay. Well, any other comments before I ask for a motion? I guess not a motion. No. Okay. Well, then let's do this. I have a handy piece of paper here. What I'm going to do on it is ask anyone interested in being chair of the Public Records Advisory Council to state their names. We will take names and then we will move to a vote after that. So I will get started. I am submitting my name as chair for the PRAC. Anybody else? Remember, and you can nominate yourself or others, I suppose.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to throw Michael Crone's name in the ring.
Steve Suo, please don't.
Just to get under your skin.
I second Steve, actually.
Okay, so we got Michael, unless he's saying no.
Oh, I really do not think that I can take that on, you guys.
Okay.
You know, I'm interested, but I'm really wary of the time commitment. It's hard to do this already with a full-time job. So that's a real hesitation.
Yeah, I won't say it's not a time commitment, Emily, but it's definitely variable. Like certainly during the legislative session, it gets a lot busier during the in-between times. And I will say, so what I'm trying to put forth here is us to establish some like definitive work goals of a reasonable amount that we will then dig into over the coming year or so, that I hope will essentially almost start an automated process among subcommittees that will report back to the larger committee periodically so we could take appropriate next steps. But if we are successful, it might alleviate some of the time commitment in doing the work during the like quote unquote regular times. That being said, it's no guarantee what might happen and require more time commitment.
Well, I'd put forward Mark Landauer.
Okay. Mark, is that something you're on board with?
Too late, Mark.
Well, I'm having a little trouble here, Les, honestly. And if I may address the council just briefly on this subject, I'd appreciate it.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. When the council was first created, and you know, I was super excited about it for a lot of different reasons. But one of them was sort of my understanding when this was sort of pulled together by John Huffman, that the PRAC was going to serve in some sense as a balance for legislative issues that were being considered by the Legislative Assembly. Now, I'll be the first to admit that the Legislative Assembly can do whatever it wants. It's a legislative body, so on and so forth. However, there was a bill that was considered by the Legislative Assembly to address, for among other things, costs as they are charged by public bodies to members of the
Mark, you're broken up.
and some of you have been around here for quite some time. I'm more the discussion around public records charges for the media. Sorry, go ahead, Todd.
Sorry, Mark, you broke up there for a moment, so I'm not sure if we missed part of your point.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm personally really torn because I don't see that the legislative body necessarily views us as sort of an advisory committee. That was sort of my sense after this last session. And so I'm very torn about wanting to accept Les's nomination, because I don't know if the council, at least as I have viewed it historically up to now, or at least up until the previous legislative assembly, is really what I thought it was supposed to be. And I hope that that makes sense, at least to some of you. So I'm quite honestly, I'm a little torn here because of that challenge. I won't go into greater detail, but I think Scott and if Rob were around, they would understand why I'm sharing this, because it really was centered on a particular bill that got quite a bit of attention, and unfortunately, I'm torn. So I very much appreciate the nomination, Les. I would prefer that somebody else were the chair I'm remain committed to this group and to this system, but I'm seriously having doubts as to whether or not the Legislative Assembly really considers us as an advisory board, as at least I thought it was designed to be.
Well, Mark, if I just want to respond to what you said, because I really appreciate you, your willingness to be so open and definitive about your feelings. As someone who's been primarily an outside observer of the PRAC until recently, although an active participant in its work, I understand how you're feeling and where you're coming from. And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of the PRAC's work up until now has been centered around attempting to appoint a new advocate, which has really eaten into its ability to do other more substantive work. Really, the reason my goal in having these two meetings is to pivot back to what the PRAC was envisioned to do, which is dig down into these weighty, important public records issues and establish itself as a presence, as an advisory board, as a guide through these public records issues. Because the reality of the situation is none of us are the ultimate decision makers when it comes to changing the law or enacting new policy within public bodies. We are merely there to provide our expertise and hope, much like attorneys who write law review articles, that we are putting wisdom out there into the ether so that those who can do will with it. And in a lot of ways, the PRAC has been denied that opportunity up until now. And so my goal in having this particular agenda is to put us on that footing and to start making it clear that we are always going to be a party to most of these conversations. And more than that, we are worthy of being listened to and trusted. That's what I've been trying to do as the public records advocate, as someone who's in a position of high authority with little enforcement power. I just want public bodies out there to know, as well as members of the public and the media, that if there's an issue, I will be there with an opinion, and you can always come to me for help or guidance or disagreement, but that the office will always be there. I think the PRAC can be the same thing. It's just going to take time. But I understand your frustration, and I would never try to convince anyone to move into a leadership role in this council if they're not ready to do so. But I do think there's hope. I do think there's a lot of good we can accomplish over time. All right, well, so right now, I think I still might be the only candidate for chair. So do we have anybody else? Tony,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
I'm confused. Mark, was that comment a non-accepto, don't accept, or?
Can I make a
How long is the term?
Oh, does anyone have quick
We'll
access?
negotiate. We'll negotiate that.
I'm sure we haven't figured that one out either. I'm sorry.
Everybody, hold on one
No.
second. Tony, do you know that answer?
I don't know that answer. I think that's kind of I kind of want to come back to the point I made earlier and holds me back. Mark, thank you for being open and expressing what your kind of pushback is. You know, this first group of council or council members, whether it's almost up or just about up, you know, our term is almost over, but there's still 3-4 months of opportunity to go. You know, I can't speak for everyone else, but you know, my story, if someone were to ask me tomorrow what my experience on PRAC was, I would honestly say I served on a public board that mostly dealt with finding its public records advocate and didn't get the opportunity to do much. And that's fine. It is what it is. It's the story of this first PRAC council, but I don't think, and I commend Todd, you for wanting to pivot and kind of move that storyline of what this group should be doing. But if the Senate and lawmakers already have this maybe preconceived notion of the political capital, for lack of a better word, that the PRAC might have in shaping policy for open records, then I think this group needs to kind of figure out what that pivot is going to specifically look like, and not kind of go as, you know, kind of lay the foundation as you kind of move along. I think you should probably spend this last term or the last remaining months of this term figuring out what exactly, is there going to be a balance of requesters and government people leading the, you know, a chair and a co-chair, or how will they review the job performance of the public records advocate. How will committee members hold meetings? How does a member of the public reach out to council members if they're not satisfied with the public records advocate? I mean, I feel like there's probably a lot of discussion that could probably happen that this group can present to the next cohort and say, we did our best, and maybe we're just talking to ourselves, but like, this is what we're going to have ready for the next term, instead of just trying to, and I kind of feel, I'm not saying that this is what you try to do, Todd, but just instead of just trying to like etch out a small win before the term's over, I'd rather turn in these are our learning lessons, and this is what we envision. Sorry, I'm talking too long. I'll just leave it there.
No,
So
thank you, Tony. And
I would suggest, if anyone else would agree on that, like I would just suggest pausing the selection of a leader until we figure out what the terms are. If a chair, if these are 4-year terms, maybe a chair could do 2 years or something like that. I don't.
No, actually, I have that info that might help. I looked at SB 500. I'm sorry, I didn't refamiliarize myself before the meeting. It's 2-year terms or until that individual's term is up. So we did actually, or you guys did actually provide for that in the drafting of SB 500. Whomever is in that position is subject to, or can be reappointed into the same position as well. So they're 2-year terms or until your term is up, and you can continue beyond that if you wish to do so. Here's the deal, or at least here how I'm seeing this, partially in response to what Tony said, is this is the bill that the Public Records Advisory Council drafted. This is the result of your work and your desire. Obviously, it would have been helpful if maybe you and we had addressed some of these issues in detail before, but this is the state of the law at this moment. Although the bill, as far as I understand how bills work, doesn't mean we have to do this instantly in this meeting, but we are required to do it. So we have the option of either discussing this in more detail and fleshing out a better understanding of what these positions entail, or assume that when you created this language and accepted it, you understood that it means we vote for a leader and a vice leader and we move forward with that, and those positions become defined or fleshed out over time. Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all share the frustration over how the past couple of years have gone. I also remember, though, before Ginger left, and like during the process of locating her, hiring her, and working with her in the first year, I think we did get a lot done, at least in terms of figuring out how to work together. And I think it's easy to forget that and have that be overshadowed by the recent experience. And I think, Tony, one of the things that you mentioned was, we have time left in our terms and we shouldn't squander it. I think I am in favor in moving ahead with this and getting on to the rest of the agenda that we had planned, so we can talk about some of that substance. I think one of the things that I found in the first year and a half on the council is that, that we actually have a pretty surprising capacity to form consensus, and it really comes down to personal relationships. And you mentioned, Tony, a balance of requester and government agencies. I think, I was kind of leaning toward having somebody in the middle, like Michael or Secretary of State's office for that reason. But I also think, from what I know about Mark and what I know about Emily, I think a chair and co-chair role for the two of them would work really well. It would offer some balance, and I'm not too worried about bias in that regard. I think either we're going to figure out how to work together and make something productive and be heard, or not, and let's just move forward with it.
I do want to be respectful of everyone's time and keep this moving. This is an important discussion, and I believe I've neglected Senator Thatcher's hand. Before you speak, though, Senator Thatcher, I did just want to say, to me, the fact that everyone is so willing to openly share their feelings, I think shows how well this council has been working together, how much it's grown into its role, and everyone are willing to share their clear, open, honest opinions to keep this conversation moving forward. And to me, that's a favor, and that's a vote in favor of moving forward because of that. Senator Thatcher, please go ahead.
Thank you. It seems like there's a concern that needs to be addressed, whether it applies to the situation at hand now or to a future advocate and a completely different committee. The concern about having the advocate be the chair is, that's a concern. But if we got rid of that particular conflict of interest by, ensuring that there was a way that the board could, that the committee could actually ensure that there's a process to make sure that if there's ever a time where the committee wants to reconsider the appointment, I'll just put it that way, of the advocate, that there's a way to do so without being blocked by the chair/advocate. So maybe we could make that the purview of a vice chair, perhaps.
Yes, thank you. Okay, any more discussion? Mark, is your hand up?
Well, I kind of took it quickly down, but you caught me. I'm really torn. I'm committed to this group. I'm committed to this process. I'm committed to the council. I suppose I'm willing to serve, but at the same time, I do it with a little bit of trepidation, if you know what I mean. So I'll leave it at that. I really am torn about this because I am having some difficulties. But if it's the will of the group, I think I've demonstrated my willingness and desire to reach consensus on most issues amongst this group, and I remain committed to trying to find that path of not necessarily least resistance, but where the most of us can come together to agreements. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm willing to go forward as the council desires, whether it be with Todd or Emily or myself. I do understand the concerns of Todd being in that position, but at the same time, I also think there are probably some workarounds that we could put into a set of bylaws that would prevent that type of shenanigans, although I highly, highly doubt we'll ever get to that point. So I certainly understand the concerns. There may be some concerns about optics as well, with Todd being the chair. I'm frankly not as concerned about that as much, but I'll shut up and leave it at that.
Okay, Emily, is your hand still up?
It's not up, but I'd certainly support Mark as chair. And I think there's arguments on all sides as far as I think it also, what people have said, that we could handle the potential conflict of interest of the advocate being the chair. We could handle that other ways. It does seem maybe a little bit cleaner just to not have to, but hand down.
Okay, thank you. Tony, is your hand still up? No, okay. Scott?
I would support a Landauer-Harris ticket for the chair, vice chair, and I would suggest that it's not in the statute, but the PRAC can make it a custom that the chair alternate between the agencies and the requester community by term. So I'm this, I understand the nominations aren't closed, but I'm willing to support the slate.
Sounds like Israel. They have a rotating premiership right now because of, a difficult impasse in elections there.
Or
Yeah,
NATO.
that thing.
Oh, does
Thanks,
NATO
Steve.
do the same thing?
It's not uncommon.
According to one of our members. Okay, so we have me and we have Mark. Do we have any other nominations? Les, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to see if you'd entertain a motion for the election.
And what are you proposing?
Well, I would move that the council elect Mark Landauer as chair and Emily Harris as vice chair.
I appreciate the motion, but I think it would be cleaner if we just went through a straight vote, so we could have all votes counted of council members present. So I guess I'm going to deny the motion. Does anyone want to fill me in on terminology? I'd appreciate it.
It would die for lack of a second.
Okay. Okay. Well then, do we have any other names to put in the pot for chair?
Can I move to close the nominations?
Yes. Second?
Second.
Second.
Okay. Now, because I am a candidate, I do not want to collect the votes. Molly Woon, who has made it clear she does not want to be a candidate for chair or vice chair. Can I impose upon you to collect the votes for the chair position, please?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So then, go ahead.
How are we doing that?
I think poll each member and they can state who they're voting for or if they are abstaining. And if that's wrong, someone can let me know. Steve?
One candidate per voter? One vote per person?
Yes, because I think we'll hopefully get to a clear majority. Let me see how many of us are present. And I'm sorry, I'm just gonna have to ask this question because I don't know the answer and I don't mean any disrespect. For purposes of this type of votes, is Senator Thatcher able to vote as well for chair? I'm getting a head shake no from Scott Winkles. Sorry. Does anyone have an answer to that question?
I'm ex officio. I don't think I can vote.
Even for this purpose. Okay, thank you. Okay, then let's see. We have, including myself, we have 10 members present, so it is possible we could end up with a tie.
Who are the members? I've got Scott, Mark, Les, Steve, Emily, Molly, Todd, Tony. Who else?
Sharon.
Sharon.
And did you say
Michael?
And Michael.
So I'm going to go down the list just in the order I have it so I don't confuse it. I have myself, I have you, Molly, I have Michael Crone, Emily Harris, Steve Suo, Les Zaitz, Scott Winkles, Mark Landauer, Sharon Khosravi, and Tony Hernandez. Okay.
And I'm sorry, is it Sharon or Sharon? I wasn't getting that name correct.
Sharon. I believe.
Sharon.
Yes.
Sharon. Okay, thank you. Okay, we're ready to do this? Cool. So we have either Todd or Mark, and in no particular order, I promise this is just the way I wrote down the names. I will call on you and you can vote for one or abstain. Scott.
Mr. Landauer.
Okay. Mark.
Todd?
Tony.
I vote for Mark.
Les.
Mark Landauer.
Steve.
Mark.
Emily.
Mark.
Todd.
Sorry, Mark.
Sharon,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. Mark.
Michael,
Well, they'd both be great, but I'm going to vote for Mark too, since that's what we're doing right now.
great. And I am a voting member and I'm voting for Mark. So that is a clear majority for Mark.
Congratulations, Mark, and Godspeed. Before we move on to the vote for vice chair, I just realized, because Tony alluded to that the term of the chair and vice chair wouldn't start until after the new year. That's not actually in our statute, as far as I know. So I would recommend, because we have an agenda set for these two meetings, that I continue to preside over them as chair, and the nominations or the elections take effect for the next meeting, but I'm open to discussion on that and a different outcome.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Do you need a third? I am in favor, yes.
Aye.
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 All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. Mark, you will preside as chair at the start of the next meeting that will commence after the second part of this meeting on September 10th. Congratulations, or September 16th, sorry. Okay, now let's move on to nominations for vice chair. Do I have any?
This is Michael. I nominate Emily, consistent with the discussion we've been having.
And how does Emily feel about that?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
I'll
Thanks.
second that motion.
We're not up to motions, Mark.
And I
Thank
second
you.
that motion.
Thank you. Okay, any other names? Okay, hearing none, I don't think we need a motion. I'll close nominations for vice chair, and I don't think we even need a vote, but we could for the record. Molly,
I don't need,
I'm seeing,
all those in favor say aye or hold up a thumb.
Aye.
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 Yeah, that's a voice vote. No?
Aye.
Any no's? No. All right.
great, congratulations, Emily. This is great, and we are just at the hour mark, so not too bad, everybody. Let's talk about creation of a secretary position, although actually, now that I'm no longer chair, or will no longer be, this might be worthy of discussion, because I did not feel competent to administer the meetings and then effectively create minutes in a reasonable time period after the meetings to get them out to the PRAC and other stakeholders. Now that I will no longer be chair, you know, perhaps the chair and vice chair could discuss amongst themselves if they would like the creation of a secretary position, how they want those duties administered, or we could just move to create a secretary position today. What I was going to recommend was, if we did create a secretary position, it would be a 6-month term. So that would be essentially perhaps 2 meetings per member. They could continue into additional 6-month terms if they wished, or we could elect additional chairs. And I would obviously have suggested that we are all open to rotating through those positions so it doesn't become too burdensome for any one person. So we can move forward and create a secretary position and elect someone into it for a 6-month term. We could do away with that idea, or we could table it until the Landauer-Harris administration. Comments?
I wonder, Todd, I wonder if, given that at least part of this, I assume, is going to be making records of our meetings timely and publicly available, it probably makes sense for, since you're not going to be doing the other stuff, I wonder if this is something you would be able to manage for us, like having a record and making it available on the website and things of that nature. Seem like they're going to be harder for other members of the PRAC to do without interfacing with, I don't know, staff that we maybe don't work with regularly, et cetera.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, Michael, but when Emily volunteered at the last meeting, yeah, it was incumbent on me to provide her with the video. so that she could then generate the record. And I'm more than happy to continue doing that, especially if I will be the one that continues to set up these meetings for the PRAC, which I'm open to that discussion, because literally when this is over, it automatically renders the video. It gives me a link and I can immediately email that to whomever is doing the minutes. So I stay open.
Todd, as the future chair, that will be one of my first edicts. Okay, so just so you know.
What will be?
That you will ensure that the record is maintained and sent to either yourself or whoever the secretary is for a quick Scribner's summary of the tape. I'm personally of the opinion, if it makes any sense, Todd, let me ask you this. Where are you on staff levels at this time?
There's one FTE, me. I am currently working with DAS to create the job posting for the deputy because that position is currently fully funded. However, DAS, I believe, is attempting to hire for like 3,000 new positions. So it's a very slow moving process. My goal is to have a deputy in place by the end of the year, barring any additional delays. And that's it. In 23-25, when the independent budget is put to the legislature, it will hopefully include and ask for 2 additional FTEs. But you know, nothing's guaranteed at this point.
Well, it just for consideration of everybody, it seems to me that if we're probably going to have 2, well, considering this meeting, next week's meeting, probably 1, maybe 2 more meetings before the end of the year. It seems to me that I don't know if we have to go through the formal process of actually electing a secretary, because it seems to me that the office itself by the end of the year may very well be staffed up double its size and the capacity may exist. I just throw that out there because it seems to me that being the secretary whose only responsibility is a regurgitation of the tape that they have to listen to, I don't know if that's a terribly desirable position for anybody to want, just to be very honest.
Well, yeah, Mark, I appreciate what you're saying, but my concern is that my other duties may get in the way of my ability to do this in a timely manner, which is how this started. But the reality of the situation is you elected someone other than the advocate to have greater independence and separation from the office. Yes, this is kind of like the dirty work of doing that, but I do view it as part of the PRAC kind of establishing its own structure. And the advocate as a member, I could be the secretary, but it wouldn't necessarily be the duty of the advocate to be the secretary for those reasons. I've been a member of committees on the bar, and we have, you know, chair, vice chair, and secretary positions and treasurer positions as well, which really isn't an issue for this council. And yeah, all I did as secretary was take minutes. That is the role of the secretary. It's a small duty, but it is a formal and important one. And I just like this notion, if this is PRAC 2.0 after the independence bill, that it continue to evolve and look like an official independent council with all the sort of inherent structures and rights and responsibilities. Tony, I see your hand up.
I'll volunteer for it. I have a Premiere Pro, which has this voice to text thing. So if you're able to like automatically quickly download the audio and video and send it to me, I'll plug it through the machine, and it basically transcribes. It's artificial intelligence, and it transcribes everything into a document, word for word. And then all I got to do is just kind of read through it as the tape goes to make sure all the words are correctly, and then send it back out.
I think that's great, and I appreciate you volunteering. I see that as a vote in favor of creating a secretary position, but I don't think anyone in any way should be obligated beyond individual 6-month terms unless they wish to continue. That's what I would be suggesting. Emily.
I like the idea of a 6-month term because you have identified it as you know, it is extra work. I also think it could fit fine into the duties of the advocate's office. It is a process of business of keeping this office running. I think it might be helpful to clarify what's expected to be posted, because what the purpose of we're in a great position to kind of model public records, especially in this era of recorded meetings and remote meetings that may in fact continue. But we want to present it, the contents of the meeting so that it's accessible to many people, and that the idea of a transcript is that they don't have to listen to the whole 2-hour meeting again, but can reference it if necessary. However, I think that we may want to set some kind of expectation that there's some kind of summary, a list of members present, something that someone who just needs to know what business the PRAC accomplished and at what time codes they can find out more. If it in fact was a recorded meeting, then that would be helpful. But I think we may want to consider whether the expectation would be something a little bit more than simply a transcript, because our job is to help people understand what happened and make it as easy as possible for them to do that.
Yes, and true, although that is definitely going above and beyond the public meetings requirements for posting minutes and maybe beyond the abilities of anyone who volunteers for this role. The fact that we post a video and minutes at all actually exceeds our obligation, as I understand it, under the law. Of course, I would love to do more and make this as accessible to everyone as possible. The current process is that the meeting video itself is posted on the PRAC's website as well as YouTube, and then a transcript that meets current requirements under the public meetings law, so not necessarily voluminous or with time codes, is also posted on the PRAC's website for anyone to access, and of course is provided as requested through email or other means. So this is something else then to discuss and consider and decide upon potentially if we want to actually go above and beyond what's required, and that's something we'll need to figure out.
Can I just jump back? I didn't actually imagine it as being more work. I sort of thought it was less, because AI, I work with it all the time, as many of you I know do, isn't very accurate. And the heavy burden of, I mean, it's accurate, but it's not like you can't just read it and know what's going. You have to listen back. So the real burden of creating a transcript is listening back to a tape and correcting the transcript. And that can take quite a long time. However, if you're keeping track of what's going on during a meeting, like these are the people present, this is what was decided, here are the votes and how they went, that information could just be summarized at the top. And yeah, you may not need to do time codes, but if it was in order, people could scan the transcript and find it. So I was just trying to actually save time in my, but that may not be true either. So it might not be something we need to decide right now.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, and especially if the position will be rotating, though, I am concerned about obligating anyone who does it to kind of going beyond what's required, even though more access and information is better.
Is a transcript the same as minutes?
No, I mean, a transcript, isn't that a transcript essentially a word by word recounting of what occurred, and a minutes is essentially a legally appropriate summary of what transpired.
Yeah,
I mean, I've seen government agencies do both, do transcripts and do the extra mile. So I mean, I get your what you're saying, Emily, and for a reporter and writer who is used to doing government watching meetings. Maybe summaries would be good. I wasn't trying to propose that, me having some sort of program that has machine-based learning, transcribe it and dump it. Of course, I did, and if I didn't properly express that yes, there would be some sort of review time to make sure that the machines got it right. But, that I was just trying to promote something quickly because it sounded like there was a lack of time for people, and that seems like a quick option. And having 10,000 words on a text document from anyone, with a little bit of time could easily maybe summarize it. But if as Todd says, goes beyond and from what the expectations are, I think it should be up to that person. But I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I also didn't mean to imply that you were just going to dump some, hard to read transcript out to the public. Not at all. I didn't want you to have to take the time to go back through and listen and correct. That's all.
Yeah, taking minutes being the secretary is work. It will impinge upon the work you do outside of this council, and that's why I'm advocating we kind of all share the burden.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but often minutes are taken during the meeting, so you don't necessarily have to review the tape, correct?
Sure,
I mean,
but
yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But, but everyone just operates differently. And I know for me personally, even outside of chairing this council, if I were just a member, I would have a hard time because of the way I learn and operate to keep useful, fulsome contemporary minutes. I would have to go back, and that takes time. So yeah, everyone's different. So do we have a motion? Mark? You're still muted. There you go.
So in complete and full disclosure, I suppose that in part my willingness to serve as the chair was due to my extreme fear of being the secretary. With that having been said, I'd like to second the nomination of Tony. Thank you.
Okay. I guess Tony made the motion to begin with for him to nominate himself. Well, but I accept that only with the caveat that this is to a 6-month term subject to renewal upon Tony's interest in a vote of the council. I have a thumbs up from Mark. So I will, Mark has seconded the motion as modified. Tony, thank you for volunteering to be our first ever secretary of the Public Records Advisory Council. I see Senator Thatcher has to go. Senator, thank you for your time and your input, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. So having said that, can I get a vote on Tony being the first secretary of the Public Records Advisory Council for a 6-month term, subject to renewal upon his interest and the desire of the council?
Second.
Okay.
Second. Vote, sorry.
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And thank you,
Aye.
Tony.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. Congratulations, Tony. And I should have added this before, but I'll say it now. Obviously, I will continue to make the record available as soon as possible, although it may not be the day of the council meeting, but within a few days, and make it available to you as soon as possible. So thank you. Great, everybody. Okay, well, we are at 2:12. I'd like to keep us to our 3 o'clock time period if possible, but we're moving into a very important section of the meeting, which is establishing legislative goals for this council. This is what I am envisioning. As we all know, any legislation can often take a long time to gather the appropriate stakeholders, community consensus, and impetus to pass. I am not proposing we establish any legislative goals to bring in the short session, but rather come up with ideas that we want to bring the earliest to the long session in 2023, if not beyond that, because I think anything we do, in my opinion, should affect public bodies at all levels in the state. And that's why I'm grateful that we have the input of local government on this council. But I think it'll take time to build consensus around any types of legislative changes we want to impart that will affect everybody. So this is what I am proposing. We go one by one through our members. We list our legislative concepts, if we have any. Essentially, we would start out with, you give me the title or the 1-sentence explanation. I put it on an Excel document I've already started and populated with my ideas. And then once all ideas are listed, we go back through and adopt our top 2, 3, or 4 ideas that we will then form subcommittees around at the next meeting to flesh out to bring back to the full committee. So I'd like to invite any discussion, comments, or concerns about that process before we dive in. Steve.
Sorry, I wonder whether, I mean, we're not going to have consensus right now as to a legislative concept or concepts that we all want to support, I don't think. So would it be better to reformulate this as identifying number one problem that you want solved by a group? I don't know.
Yeah, well, for instance, I have 4, I'm calling them concepts just as a general term, but they are 4 issues that I'd like to address within the public records law. I'm kind of viewing this as a process that auditors do, at least the auditors I know. They all like go to a retreat, and I originally envisioned this as a day-long meeting of us all in person at some really nice place where like the office would have paid for your lunch and everything. We would have had a whiteboard, and we could have listed out these ideas, and then essentially, because what auditors do is they list all ideas and then choose the ones they're going to actually work on, or the audits they'll undertake in the coming calendar year, fiscal year, what have you. And so because so many ideas have been batted around by all of us throughout the history of this council, I thought it'd be important to drill down to the ones we want to focus on the most that maybe not have unanimous support, but at least majority support, and then start building out those ideas in the time that we have available to us to do so. So, I mean, there's more than one way to kind of do this, but that's just what made most sense to me. I can't imagine that any of us are lacking for ideas about how this law needs to be changed, or when we hear others' concepts, ideas we can get behind. And again, this is merely essentially choosing like folder titles for the work that will then develop over time, rather than, well, I voted for this concept. Now I'm locked into like this box of what it has to look like. No, I merely want us to choose the ideas that we will then flesh out in subcommittee and full committee over full council over time. That's what makes most sense to me, but I'm just one brain here. Emily, your hand is up. It's not up. Okay, sorry. We have the same problem. I usually can't find the hand up button. Okay, any other comments at the moment on this issue before we move to actually listing them out? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to share the screen with my ideas. And remember, all we're going to do initially is I'm just going to tell you what they are, or like quickly read them out to you, and then we'll go through other members so they can list their ideas if they have any. And obviously you're not obligated to list anything. You might just want to work on someone else's concept, which of course is fine, and we'll reduce the number that we have to vote on, and we'll take it from there. So I'm going to share my list, if I could find it. Okay, and just remember, once again, I can't see you or most of you while I'm doing this, so you have to speak up if there are any issues. Okay, so I have 4 in this handy dandy Excel spreadsheet I created. Oops. The first one is update the definition of a public body. Currently, you might recall there was litigation out of West Lynn, a member of the city council refused to disclose any notes that she might have had in a personal notebook related to a city council meeting. The circuit court in Clackamas County ruled that she, in fact, was not a quote unquote public body because the definition, while it refers to state officers, presumably including elected officials, did not have a definition for the moment, I'll just say local government officers as well. That case is now on appeal to the Court of Appeals, so it's possible we'll end up with a judicial ruling from the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court that might make this moot. But at the same time, if anyone has concerns about the outcome of that or just wants to ensure as soon as possible that that issue is clarified under the law, then I think we should include language about public body officers just expressly being in the definition. That's number 1. Number 2 is expand the definition of a public record, because although it's easy to interpret the public records law as it currently exists to include social media or other online and digital platforms, I know there has been some confusion around that amongst some public bodies that I've worked with, and I understand maybe in some court cases as well. So thinking about some sort of forward-looking language, obviously the statutes do not evolve as quickly as society does, but trying to think of some sort of encompassing term that might adequately take in social media and other digital platforms for at least the next decade or so to make it clear that they are public records and subject to disclosure under the appropriate circumstances, I think would help alleviate some confusion. The next one is related to fees, and I suspect I will not be the only person who has legislative concepts about fees, but this is the one that I feel like is most important. Currently under ORS 192.324, subsection 4A, as you know, it says a public body can recoup its actual costs in providing a public record. I firmly believe that more money needs to be invested in our systems up front so that constituents, members of the public or the media are not necessarily paying the full cost of providing records, because I think that's undermining the spirit of the law. And so I think the actual cost language should be changed to up to actual cost, therefore making it clear to public bodies that they do not necessarily have to charge the full freight for providing records. More to that within the same concept is duplicating what's done under the federal public records law, which is creating a tiered system that divides the cost of providing a public record into search, duplication, and review fees, and then only permitting certain of those 3 categories to be charged to a requester, depending on if they are commercial, educational, or a general request. So just for instance, commercial requesters at the federal level, as you might know, pay for all 3 categories of having the records provided to them. Educational institutions only pay duplication fees, and quote unquote general requesters, which would encompass the media, pay search and duplication fees. So establishing some sort of tiered system within our law would go a long way towards perhaps initially reducing costs at the outset, and then establishing maybe a better system for charging fees moving forward. And then finally, within this concept is, well, actually it's 2 parts, I'm sorry. Establish more detailed criteria for what, when a public body would offer a fee waiver or reduction. You know, it's not very fleshed out in our law right now. I don't think any additional criteria we add to the law should be the beginning and end of it. So it would be something along the lines of, you know, offering a fee reduction or waiver in the public interest includes but is not limited to the following, and it gives them a baseline of elements that have to be considered when determining whether or not a fee waiver or reduction should be offered. And then finally, if a public body satisfies its own criteria that the public interest has been met, then they must provide a fee waiver or reduction, rather than currently it's not obligatory. So that is all within the fee concept that I have, excuse me. And then finally, kind of to the points that were made earlier, I highly recommend that we as a council draft a white paper about the feasibility of eliminating all current specific exemptions in the public records law, all 600 or so that aren't under federal law, and instead creating a body of categories of information that would be either conditionally or specifically exempt under any circumstances. And as a second part of that white paper, address all low-hanging fruit that's currently in the public records law. In other words, any exemption that has never been subject to an AG order or adjudication in court. Because for instance, let's say there's 350 of those. If those are eliminated from the law and we're down to 250 exemptions or something like that, it might become a more feasible concept to then take those 250 and add them into a handful up to maybe a dozen categories of exempt information or records, rather than our endlessly scrolling list of exemptions that currently exist. So those are the 4 that I am proposing we consider at this point. So what I'd like to do now is just go through the membership, get your ideas, and then we could go back and each person, and then if everyone has questions about the existing concepts, the person who suggested them could discuss them, answer the questions, and then we can move to a vote. And I can't see anybody, so unless you speak up, I'm assuming you're all in agreement.
Emily's first.
Okay. Emily, if you're willing.
Emily, your hand is still up.
And I'm
Is
going
my
to
hand up? My hand is not up, but Mark, I saw your hand go up, but
I'm going to endeavor
happy
to write
go
these
first.
down as you say them too. So please just bear with me and correct me as I go. But Emily, yeah, if you're willing, let's get you started.
Sure. And Todd, I did not get as specific, like in terms of identifying language. I really stayed more in the conceptual area, like issues that need, because some of them I'm not sure where to land on.
Yeah, no, first, obviously I had a little extra time to think about this as I prepared the meeting. That's why it's so detailed. But no, I don't expect it necessarily to be that fleshed out. We really just need ideas, and then obviously an explanation of them as questions are asked, so we could figure out what we want to vote for.
Yeah, great. And I do appreciate this detail. It's really helpful. I have some detail that I've thought through, but thought I would, if we, got to those issues, I could just bring those to the meeting at that time.
Right. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Let me just say, for the sake of time, we're probably going to end up going over at this point if people are willing to stay. So, I said 4. I would have preferred if I had said 3. So maybe if possible, stick to your top 3 or 4 concepts, because we could probably all list like 10 or 15 things we'd like to see change. But since we're going to vote anyway on top concepts, an overly exhaustive list might just not be helpful to us. So I apologize for my 4, but let's see if we could kind of keep it to 3 to 4 each max.
I actually just focused in on one that I think, we've begun to address before, and which is fees. So you've honed in on a few nitty gritty pieces. I think the outline I made for myself is a bit more holistic, but I think fees is something that we should look at and come up with some improved process. It seems to be a pain point all across the board.
Indeed. Do you want to dive in deeper at all to define it, or do you want to leave it at fees?
No, I guess I see that as you could suggest some questions that would be answered in the process of a subcommittee tackling this and coming up with a proposal. But I think that right now I would just leave it open. My understanding was like we would make subcommittees, and then that's where we would get into the nitty gritty, both taking very specific suggestions of language changes, from PRAC members or from the public, as well as, maybe addressing overall, how do we solve identifying the problem and solving it. But just fees is enough, I think, for now.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Makes sense. Okay. Who is next to volunteer?
I'll go just because I just happened to look at my legislative report to sort of rejigger my mind. I agree that fees has got to be addressed. Okay, so Todd, be sure to put down fees.
Okay.
There are two other things that I have sort of on my list that are perhaps legacy issues. One is public attorney client information that is releasable under, at least right now, a court order after 25 years. Public bodies do believe that attorney-client information, whether it's a public body or a private body, should remain confidential, despite the 25-year issue that's out there right now. The other thing that I want to throw out there, and good Lord, I can't believe I'm saying this, is a sort of a concept that Steve Suo brought, and I continue to be interested in it, although I'll confess I don't understand it. And that's probably not surprising to many of you who know me because I'm not very good at technology, but the metadata issue that Steve has raised in the past, I think has the possibility of potentially reducing government burden in handling public records, and also make them cheaper to access by the public. My challenge is local governments don't necessarily have the IT professionals out there, but I still want to examine this issue because I do think that there is something to be said for using technology to better inform the public. And I'll just leave it at that. I don't really know what the hell I'm saying here, but I do know that there's some upsides, but there are also some counterbalances that make it difficult for small local governments. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, next person, speak up, please.
I'll go. Mark, I like listening to you because, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about, but you say it so well. Hey, so I will also pile on to the fees. That is enough said. That is a source of contention on both for requesters and providers. Second, I would like us to revisit the reforms we did to the deadlines for disclosing records to assess whether the reforms that we did that were meant to tighten up government response for requests for records has produced the results that were expected. Another issue, and this is probably a legal issue that may be too challenging, but I still think it's worth considering, is the elected official treatment under the public records law, in terms of if a school board member or a city councilman turns you down any requester for a record, the only recourse is through the circuit court, which is a significant impediment in my judgment. And then finally, on the exemption side, and I'd like to hear from Michael Crone where things stand with the Sunshine Committee. I've kind of lost track, to be honest. But I would like us to identify the 5 exemptions that are the source of the most consistent conflict between requesters and providers. In other words, let's focus our firepower on the primary sources of conflict as opposed to trying to take on all 600 exemptions. That's it.
Thanks, Les. Next up.
I'll go. I like all of what you laid out, Todd, and I guess in terms of priority, definitely number 3, fees are an issue. I think generally speaking, I'd like us to be able to promote the notion of disclosure and transparency as a public good that is a core function of government. And any way we can promote that and anticipate that it's not just a burden placed on government, but that it's something that it is a service to taxpayers and citizens will be helpful. And I think fees gets at that, sort of accounting for like somebody needs to bear the cost of this, and it's not just the requester, because so often it is a public good. When it's purely for profit, then fine, charge them full freight. But I think anticipating that is important. I think what Mark was describing, I'll give it hopefully a snazzier buzzword. Actually, I think either Michael Crone or his boss came up with this term, transparency by design. And the notion is simply, so often the cost of disclosure is driven by the assertion or the reality that it's hard to retrieve the records, and it's hard to duplicate the records, it's hard to export the data, hard to get it into the hands of the requester. And so the idea of transparency by design is that we anticipate that at the front end and make sure that our data systems and our filing systems are all built knowing that there's a public records law and that people are entitled to this information, and that we want to make it as efficient as possible for them to get it. And I don't know whether there's there may be new legislation. There's definitely room for new legislation on this. I think there was legislation passed actually in 2017 that I'd be interested in revisiting to see how well it's working at the state level. There are requirements for contracting with IT systems to not impede disclosure. That's a starting point, but there's definitely more that could be done in that area. So those are my 2. And if I had to prioritize the 2, to be honest, I think fees is probably the most pressing one. The other one is well, they're both important to me, I guess. That's all I'll say. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, next up.
I'll go. Steve, thank you for bringing up your issue, because mine kind of is also, I mean, the way I would go about saying it for me, Steve, is accessibility and education to broader communities that don't have the experience of finding or experiencing the process of requesting public records. I'm thinking of a car accident victim getting a police report, or I worked at two nonprofits in my last 2 jobs that could have benefited much better from in their policy work to do some public records requests. But there was just a limited understanding and appreciation of the value that the public records law provides to the residents of the state. And so Todd, I threw in the chat. You said 1 sentence, so it's not meant to sound like a law or anything, but I think it would be great if, I understand that not all agencies have some sort of website or public effort, but if there is some sort of public facing presentation, that there should be some sort of easy to read, comprehensible at a compulsory level, language of here's your rights, here's what costs, here's what you can get, and here's who you can contact. Put that on the home page visibly, instead of having the residents or someone in a moment of whatever, having to hire an attorney just to get public records that maybe they could have done themselves.
Thanks, Tony. I just that actually is currently an obligation under the law. All public bodies are required to have a policy that says things like this, and it's supposed to be a written policy that's publicly available. And of course, what does that mean in our day and age? Put it on your website. But a lot of public bodies are either unaware of this policy or this requirement, haven't done it, or have incredibly out of date policies online that just have like old statutory references, like section references, and just incorrect information. Don't include the deadlines that were instituted in 2017. So that's definitely part of the education piece that I undertake with public bodies, and I work with them regularly to either draft or update their policies, but I could definitely see a need for
Then, Todd, I appreciate knowing that. Then I would move it forward and have some sort of enforcement mechanism to penalize those that don't, because it is an equity issue, and whether it's someone who just doesn't have the I'm going to say it, the education of knowing that the public, that the emails of a city council person or of the police officer that pulled them over, or of the teacher that is communicating with others about their child. There's all sorts of applications that that this law could apply to beyond the journalist and beyond the lawyer. And I think it's just a great tool for the public to regain trust with its government, and we should promote that.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, who's next?
I'll go. This is Molly. These are all really great ideas, and I haven't heard anything that I don't, that doesn't make me happy. But as the newer member here, I don't have anything super concrete to offer. Kind of still learning here. I will. One idea that I have talked about a little bit with Todd, that's more of a maybe in a few years from now idea. Is to position the PRAC as kind of the approver or the expert for other state agencies to come and share their public records policies. And this is kind of modeled off of one of the boards that the secretary sits on, which is the Oregon Sustainability Board. And every state agency is required to have a sustainability plan, just like everyone has to have a public records policy. And they come, the board meets 4 times a year, and the agencies are scheduled to come, rotationally and present their sustainability plan and get feedback from this group of experts in the world of sustainability. And, maybe one day, because this is kind of a big undertaking, that is kind of the way. That's one of the things the PRAC could be the experts that are telling, public entities, like, here's what's working in your policy, here's where we, and maybe it might not be it's approved or it's disapproved, but you have to check in, you have to recognize that you've got this group of experts that are here to help you, and you have to be helped. So I just, all of our agencies, so all of our levels of government are just operating with such different resources, and some folks will have a bunch of attorneys that can help them have a great public records policy, and some of them are like 3 FTE. So I wonder if there's a way for us to be better, to be resources to folks, and the spirit of transparency.
And Molly, you're promoting this as a legislative concept right now, right? As opposed to
I mean,
something. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I'm like, I guess it's just like, that's the only idea I have to offer. So whether it's a legislative concept or not, I don't know. I mean, I think it's like, this is just, eventually it would be a legislative concept, and whether there's, kind of groundwork to be done or not, I'm not sure. Whether it's like a pilot or something, whether there's cost, I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead, but just thinking about kind of like the longer term role that the PRAC could play in good governance, in general.
Fair enough. Thank you. Anybody else?
Sorry, I was on mute. Todd, this is Michael.
Hi, Michael.
I'm going to just repeat what everyone else has said, which is, I think if we could come up with a workable and satisfactory to the requester community, especially solution on fees, that would be doing a great service to the people of the state. I don't really know that I would endorse a particular solution at this point. So yours was maybe a little detailed, but I think we should have a group, or maybe just as a group, we should be talking about that as probably the number one issue. Certainly, like Les said, I'm happy to kind of revisit the timing discussion, although my sense from at least the reporters that I talk to the most is that the law is generally working pretty well, and that places where it's not working is, I guess I would say that it feels more like there are particular public bodies that maybe don't really deal with requests in good faith and try to overly bureaucratize and spend time on things. And maybe one of the things we could think about is, like, are there systemic approaches that the law could take to public bodies that are just kind of systemically trying to thwart the purpose of the law? I know there's been some small accountability pieces put into the law recently, and our office actually issued an order not too long ago where we basically told a state agency we were requiring them to waive their fees as sort of a first step on what could be a sort of progressive discipline under the authority that the law gives us to enforce the timelines, and that if they didn't actually dedicate more resources to this statutory duty, that we would start actually finding them as the law allows. But maybe there are sort of more useful ways we could look at that and deal with those sort of bad actors, because I do think there are some bad actors in the system. And honestly, there are probably bad actors on the other side too. Unfortunately, there may be a more sticky problem. So I guess I would say fees and bad actors, and the two are kind of related, actually.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, any other suggestions?
Hi, this is Winkles. So I'm all in favor. I think we do need to have a conversation about fees. There are some things that you outlined, Todd, that I think are really interesting, and I want to explore further. On top of what Mark said about that 25-year issue with attorney-client privilege, there's some other records that would be subject to that we might have an interest in talking about as well. So things like critical infrastructure blueprints, those sorts of things that we'd want to see we'd want to see protected. So I would hope that could go into the committee as well. And we're really interested in transparency by design and what that looks like. So that's a good conversation. I will also add that we would want to have a conversation additionally about employee public employee personal information, as that case that's currently being litigated as well. So that's my take.
Thank you.
Scott, out of curiosity, can I ask a question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Michael.
When you say personal information, you're talking about like addresses and phone numbers and stuff, or what do
Yeah.
you?
It's the person. Yeah, it was that conversation we had over the doxing bill in the Judiciary Committee in the special, or in the, I'm sorry, it wasn't. Well, it was special, but not in that way. In the legislative session.
And so would this include like disciplinary actions as well?
No. This is about this is about employees being harassed and threatened in their homes.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I have just a quick question? Because, you know, I look at two of these and they both have to do with really what I understood to be the Sunshine Committee's responsibility in reviewing current exemptions. It seems to me that at some point in the future, as an agenda item for the council, that we ought to get an update from somebody at the working with the Sunshine Committee, Michael, and see where they are in this process and whether or not the issues that were raised by us today are being addressed by that particular body. Thank you.
Yes, Mark, that's a great idea. And yeah, that's why for my idea related to this, I proposed a white paper, because we wouldn't be attempting to put forth a legislative agenda ourselves directly to the legislature in the form of a proposed bill, but rather providing, you know, research and recommendations to those whose duties it is to put forth that, those recommendations to assist them in their work. So that's why I thought a white paper would be better. But yeah, it would be good to get clarification from the Sunshine Committee where they're at on these issues and if they will be addressing them themselves. I just know my office has previously provided research on one occasion to the Sunshine Committee to assist them in their work. A good point.
Yeah, that was
Okay.
very helpful to the committee. And the Sunshine Committee will be having a meeting in 2 weeks from yesterday. So I'm happy to share the information, and you guys can all kind of learn with me what will be coming next for the committee. I would say that so far our work has been most successful in the organizational, in terms of agreeing that we can organize the law better, and otherwise, how do you say not very productive without saying not very productive? Otherwise, there have been challenges. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Michael. Yes, we've all been dealing with some of those same challenges over the last year and a half or so, for sure. Okay, any council member who has not yet spoken who would like to share their legislative concepts with us now? Okay, hearing none, and if you're just having a mute issue, please feel free to speak up and interrupt me. I've actually had an evolution of my own thought on this process. If we really need to vote on these concepts now to pick our top ones, or is it better, especially because there is much repetition here, and I'm willing to fold my 4 ideas under the heading of fees as well, that we just assume this as the guiding document for any subcommittee we form to initially address these issues to bring back to the full council, or if we're just going to move forward as a full council on legislative concepts, but use this as our guiding record. I'm going to stop sharing the document for a minute. But also, I have to apologize to everyone who's joined us today because I skipped over the public commentary period for this agenda item, which could have which we are obligated to listen to and should listen to. So before we continue, it's 2:49. I'm going to ask everyone to bear with us so that we can hear from the community if anyone wishes to address potential legislative concepts that the Public Records Advisory Council should pursue. I'm going to ask anyone who speaks to state their name and limit their comments to 2 minutes. for the sake of moving this meeting forward. And I'm going to ask you to use the raise hand feature so I can identify you. If you're on the phone, I think you'll have to just speak up and let us know you wish to be heard. So is there any public commentary on the issue of the PRAC adopting legislative concepts? Checking the chat. Okay, hearing none, I will note for the record that we did receive one written public comment from a member of the public, and I've made that part of the record of this meeting and sent it to each PRAC member before this meeting as well. So seeing no additional requests to offer public testimony and hearing none, I'm going to close out public testimony and move back to my statement about whether or not we need to vote on these issues or merely use it as our guiding document. Emily.
Thanks. And I just want to echo what Tony put in the chat of great discussion and appreciate hearing these thoughts and ideas. I second that, Tony. I wonder if maybe because some of these to me appear to be non-legislative, maybe at the next meeting, we look at all of the things that are on people's minds and sort out the wheat from the chaff there, legislative or non-legislative, because it seems to me some of the non-legislative may be, you know, a task, a work product that may come through your office over the course of whenever the staffing is appropriate. And as far as whole committee versus subcommittee, we should definitely discuss that. One concept I had was some of this stuff may need more research or some fleshing out of things that, you know this, pull them together. So there may be, if not a subcommittee that decides something, there may be an appropriate role for a few people to bring some research and recommendations back to we may move forward a little bit faster if we take an approach like that. That's just a thought. But the initial piece was maybe we should look at all of the things that are on the table and sort those out together, which would mean next week.
Right. And I definitely want us to commit to committees or whatever process we desire to fulfill the goals that we are now fleshing out. I broke up legislative and non-legislative simply for time. I didn't think anyone wanted to sit through a 4-hour meeting to do that all at once. And I trust everyone here is experienced enough to kind of like choose which bucket they want these to go into, but you certainly can also promote a concept in both buckets if you feel like it's appropriate, or if ultimately whatever committee doesn't adopt your concept in one, say legislatively, right, bring some version of it to the non-legislative committee. But it's really just in consideration of everyone's time and ability to commit that I broke it up, but I totally hear what you're saying. Les.
I totally appreciate it on that, Todd.
Go ahead, Les. You're muted. We have nothing. Oh, your hand was up. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
And
No
Scott,
more.
your hand is up. Scott, I see your hand is up.
My bad. Sorry.
Well, then maybe let's just put this to a motion as to whether or not we want to make this the guiding document for the work of the PRAC or subcommittee, or pick top priorities for those same purposes. And I'm not really sure how to word that in a motion, or if we need two separate ones. Mark? You're muted, sir.
Forgive me. So can I discuss the motion, perhaps?
Yeah, please.
It just seems to me, and to some degree, I do agree that some are legislative, some are not. What are we shooting for here, Todd? First of all, are we shooting for 2023? Okay.
I think that is the earliest we should be shooting for, in my opinion.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be sure that that's, I don't want to set expectations off too early here, because some of these are very complex, and to me, fees has obviously risen to the top, undoubtedly. And it seems to me that we probably ought to think about putting together a work group already for that. I think we were about to do so when we had a little bit of a problem that we ran into that we've been dealing for the last 2 years on. So I would hope that we would get that work started, because the legislature certainly has something to say about it, or at least some people in the legislature have something to say about it. I certainly would welcome the opportunity to see if we as a body can come up with something that we can agree on. I think that that would show that this body has something really positive to offer beyond the education that you do, Todd, and the mediation that you do. I think that we could very well distinguish this body as something that they can rely on. And that was the source of my frustration. I'm done.
Thank you, Mark. Now, listen, I am eager to dig in and get us back to work, which is why I don't want to say force us on a path, but put us upon a mutually agreed path to get done the type of work that we're capable of doing. And one of those is legislative proposals. That's why I very much want us to define the universe of legislative change we're interested in now or soon, so we don't have to constantly bat around concepts, whether we are wholeheartedly in favor of what we choose or are merely willing to compromise, that it will make up our legislative work over the next year or so without distraction, confusion, or delay. So I think we need to pick stuff, be willing to live with it, and just get to work. Hence the list. Emily.
I'm afraid I inadvertently sent us down a path. I'm totally in favor of moving forward on a few things. I just, yeah, we don't have to wait till next week. It's clear fees are going to be something we need to address. If we want to make a work group on that today, great. No problem.
Okay. Well, yes. Well, no, the subcommittees or work group or whatever the council is going to do is the next meeting. This is merely creating our universe of legislative concepts. So which eloquent member of this council wants to put a motion forward regarding, do we just use the current full document as our guiding document, or do we vote to pick the top priorities and use that as our guiding document moving forward? Steve.
I think I wanted to pick up what Mark was saying. I mean, regardless of what else we do in terms of the universe of priorities, there's clearly consensus around fees. What if we just go ahead and say right now we're going to form a subcommittee to address fees, and everything else we can figure out later?
What's wrong with waiting until next Thursday? Because by then we will have our fully defined universe of legislative and non-legislative concepts, I hope, which will then dictate to us potentially how many committees we need. Because, okay, we could say, sure, fees committee, that's obvious, that's going to happen. Then do we go back and start folding in other stuff as these concepts develop over these next 2 meetings? It just, the way it makes sense to me, which doesn't necessarily mean it makes sense to other people this way too, is to know all our factors before we start kind of then establishing processes to deal with them. So for me, it just makes more sense. Let's just say 3 legislative concepts, 5 non-legislative concepts. That's probably too much. And then build out the system to make that happen rather than still developing the amount of work we're going to do while developing processes for them at the same time. We're all incredibly busy people with a lot of other obligations. We all want to do the work, and I just want us to do the work most effectively in the most efficient sort of way. So I'm eager to get to work on fees too, but I recommend we just get everything defined by the next meeting and then build the committees around the work. Who else? Does someone else have their hand up?
Well,
or Steve, I'm sorry if you want to respond.
Yeah, that makes sense. I certainly another week can't hurt. I do think, in terms of within the legislative concept universe, it sounds like nobody disagrees with any of the other ideas that have been put out there. But fees is such a big discussion and such a heavy lift, even with a year ahead of us. It seems like that's where I would put the energy, and I think we could leave the others. I mean, in terms of voting for like our agenda, I don't know. I would kind of put the others in the back seat, or like, you know, I'd like to be able to get to those as well, but I would hate to get hung up on trying to, you know, I don't think we should be forming 6 or 8 subcommittees.
Yeah, and there very well could be one legislative committee that then takes this full list or the smaller list we vote on and gives the full council its prioritized legislation to develop that we then vote on as a council to move forward with. And others could agree with you, and then we focus on fees, we dive in, that's the one thing we're bringing forward eventually, or we try to develop additional concepts as well, depending on what people want to do. But it's certainly valid to consider tackling the biggest, most important thing, focusing all our energy on it, and just moving forward with that too. Absolutely. Scott, you have your hand up.
I do. I would have a hard time voting on a priority legislative concept at this point, not seeing what that is. I mean, I think saying we need to talk about it, we need to develop something, I'm all in favor of that. But there are some things we may not be able to get to agreement on that we might vote on today as a priority, but we deadlocked. So it's just hard to say this should be our top priority as an LC if we don't know, you know, what it is yet. Although I am really interested in some of the stuff you said on fees, and I think that's going to be a really great conversation.
Steve.
Yeah, I that makes sense, Scott. I mean, I don't think we're voting on Todd's legislative concept. It seems like we're voting on, you know, the issue.
Yeah, and I will say now, I'll reform the list. I'm willing to fold my my fees idea under just the heading of fees, and then suggest it later as a possible avenue to consider when dealing with fees. So you could just consider my concept related to fees being about fees and not the additional detail at this time. So I'm in favor of a motion to just take this list that we've drafted and use that as our guiding document moving forward, however we choose to move forward on developing legislative concepts.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. We have our list. Congratulations, everybody, and it's only 3:02 p.m. Not bad. So that concludes our agenda. I want to thank you all for your time and continuous energy in this regard. I welcome our new chair and vice chair, and I commit to continue working with all of you and supporting this council to the fullest extent possible. Thank you all for your time.
Les, did Les have a stand up?
Oh, I'm sorry, Les. Am I leaving you hanging?
Oh, that's okay. We'll talk about it next week.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
I think it's important for us to think about community, engaging the public in this early stages of this work, that we're not working just in isolation. So we'll discuss it next week.
Yeah, so I definitely recommend using whatever platforms you have to advertise part 2 of this meeting next week. Okay. Everybody, thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.